Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me at the back? I said good morning. I was just making sure mic is working or not, that's all. Thank you very much. There are obviously many people here who understand the subject of security far better than I do. And therefore I thought that this presentation, instead of making it a technical one on security, technologies, IT, to touch upon an aspect which I think is probably very often forgotten in this race to get more and more equipment, more and more technology. So the first sentence that you would have seen if the slide was working is that rape increases the price of hamburgers. Have you thought about it ever? Rape increases the price of hamburgers. Now that's a powerful statement to make, especially the slide was on, you would have also seen McDonald's there. And the reason why it does that is any modern economy, any emerging economy, one of the vital signs of growth or indicators of growth is the amount of women in the workforce. Now this is deliberate sabotage. Amount of women in the workforce. Now if we look at the agricultural economy of India, we have something like about 85 to 90% in the workforce. But when we look at the urban India, we find that the workforce, presence of women in the workforce is far lower than what it should be compared to any modern economy. When you look at the higher social costs, because women are not in the workforce, that could be in terms of the hygiene cost, the education cost. It's a known fact that as more women enter the workforce, the overall society's development is much higher. And you can see that from states like Kerala and many other states where the education of women is much higher. So what in effect this means is that each time there is a situation that is created because of which women don't come into the workforce, it actually costs the entire economy something. So I'm just using one point here. I started with the point of a crime on women, and I'll sort of tie this up in a mosaic which will show that every crime that happens, in some way, we are paying the bill for it. You and I, we as a private citizen, are paying a bill for it. And so sometimes when we talk about this large scale, terrorist acts happening or global scale disasters happening, we are missing the fact that our daily inflation, the cost that we are incurring on pretty much everything, is actually getting added on by petty crime, by minor crime, and as the crime increases, our cost to just survive in a society starts increasing. Especially in an urban scenario, and you'll see why in a little while. So typically, after any one of these rape incidents which happened recently in Gurgaon, if you remember, anyone remembers here? I'm sure many are from Gurgaon, and I see some people who have been affected by it, affected as in a business by it. So what was the typical response of the society or the apparatus? Anyone? Women got raped in Sahara Mall. What's the typical response? Sorry? Should not come out after 8 p.m. Should have an escort when they come out, or should have a pickup and drop. This is not happening for free. GPS cars have to be employed. Then you have higher cost of employing women. And after this happens, what does the CEO of a business do when he finds that the cost of employing women starts going up? Don't employ women. That's the net reaction. So the economic downside of a single rape is paid for by the entire society as a whole because the cost structure starts shooting up, and we don't realize that. And obviously this is multiplied, especially in a country like India, which has got a huge rural population that is slowly migrating into the urban cities. So if you look at the cost structure, for example, of the women in the workforce, the economics of women in the workforce, and we start from the cities which are in the hinterland. If you look at a woman who is trained there, educated there, to be able to work in an urban area, you find that the costs are much lower. And as you start moving up in cities, you will see from B3 cities to B2 cities, the cost starts increasing. And obviously the highest cost of anyone, not just women, but men also, in a city like Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, the metros, Mumbai, is the highest. This high cost now is amortized by employing them in places like Gurgaon and the other metros and new sort of urban areas that are coming up. But whenever incidents of rape happen, whenever incidents which scare people happen, this entire community starts shying away. Parents are more reluctant to send their children away. Parents are more reluctant to have their daughters staying separately in chamris and chawls and PG accommodations. So basically, the cost structure of servicing these people in Gurgaon, which could have been leveraged from here, who would have taken a large part of this money and put it back into their local economies, all of that starts stopping. And it all begins with that one rape, which is, in terms of absolute statistics, completely inconsequential. But its effect that it has on the overall economy ends up that for every rape, we end up paying personally. So each time you have a cup of coffee in a 5-star hotel, there is a certain amount in that bill which is added for that vehicle screening which is happening outside, for the DMFD which is put over there, for that 20 security guards who will show a mirror to the bottom of your car. All of these costs are being amortized by who? By coffee, food, alcohol, whatever else you're drinking there. But this is coming out of our own economy. It's not, nobody is contributing to this other than the consumers. So in other words, pretty much every crime affects us personally, economically. Even if it doesn't affect us from a family point of view or from a personal point of view, as in it's not my sister who got raped, but the fact is, every time a woman gets raped, every time a crime is committed, every time a bar is attacked, a mall is attacked, every time there's a shootout in a mall, we pay for it. All of us pay for it. And there has been this long-term fallacy, many of us are lulled into that fallacy, that there has been no major terrorist attack for the last 3 years. But we are going through the after effects of terrorism for the last 3 years. So each time we pay more for coffee, each time a 5-year-old girl gets frisked for weapons in a mall, we are going through terrorism. Now, unless this connect is made from a business point of view, we will constantly keep reacting to situations on a case-by-case basis. So whenever there is an attack on a hotel, hotel gets secured. When there's an attack on a mall gets secured. Tomorrow it will be a school, day after tomorrow it will be any other public place. But each time these attacks happen, we are forgetting to attach the economic value to these attacks with the personal sort of investments that we are making. Our society's typical response, most societies actually, not just ours, to any sort of crime, terror, any sort of attack, is basically to move people from productive workforces into essentially non-productive workforces. So when I put productive and non-productive, I am not for a moment suggesting that those who are in the security space are not productive. But they are not economically producing anything for the economy. They are providing protection, but they're not producing. So every country, including ours, has a ratio of one person who produces to 3 or 4 or 5, in our case it's 1:4, of people who don't produce anything. They are servicing and they are helping and servicing. It could be security, it could be protection, but they're not actually producing anything. Now when you look at the whole population of productive people, and you realize that for every one person who is a producer, there are many people who are not actively producing. So each time a security incident happens, and each time there is this outcry for raising more police forces, more IRBs, more individuals, essentially what we are doing is we are moving people from the productive side into a non-productive side, thereby increasing the load of this ratio on the person who is producing. So from 1 producer to 4, the ratio starts moving 1 to 6, 1 to 8, 1 to 10. Something's got to give. Eventually, the society, the economy has to find a way to fund this security. And that funding can only come by allocating resources, whether it's human. So each time you see a security guard who is standing outside holding a rifle, you've got to visualize the fact that he is a highly trained, highly educated young man who has got 20 years of productive life ahead of him, who is just holding a piece of metal and standing and not contributing in any fashion, in any economic fashion. I don't mean in a holistic fashion. As a holistic fashion, obviously, he's doing a great job and a great service to the nation. But from an economic point of view, he is not adding anything to the nation. And each incident which forces us to raise more and more troops is actually debilitating us from an economic point of view. Does that make sense? Does it? Okay, now, so our response, I just want to take 2611 because that's something that's been on the mind share of most Indians even after about 3.5 years. We switched on many aspects after this attack which increased the cost of doing business forever. It wasn't that we decided to do this hotel drill for 1 year and then we'll see what happens after that. We didn't. We started that drill, it is continuing forever. We increased the amount of time or trauma, or rather we decreased the speed of doing business. Have you seen the amount of time it takes to just enter a hotel these days? Just imagine the throughput which increases, the amount of footfalls which reduce, the amount of time it takes to get into the airport, the amount that the aircraft stands still, thus amortizing on waste expenditure because of that one incident that happened 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. We will start drills, we will turn on switches which we can never switch off thereafter. All these switches which have been turned on, nobody can switch them off. Nobody can say, okay, let's now stop this stringent checking, let's reduce the amount of frisking that is done, because once a switch has been switched on in security, it remains in perpetuity. It's almost like taking an economy of a well-oiled machine and throwing sand inside it and slowing it down. And that's what happens with every security incident. That's what happens with every response to a security incident, that we take more resources, we reduce the time that a business cycle takes, and this continues in perpetuity. There is no committee which can sit down, there is no body which can sit down and say, these 18 drills which were set up in 2611 can now be done away with. It just doesn't happen. Doesn't happen with 911, doesn't happen with 2611, doesn't happen with 77, doesn't happen with any incident after a period of time. It continues in perpetuity. So we continue to pay the price as an economy forever. So is there a way out? I mean, is there a thought that we can sort of look at and figure a way out? Anybody know this gentleman? Heard of this person? George Kelling? No? So George Kelling was a Harvard professor who in 1982 postulated a theory called the broken windows theory. Some of you may have heard it if you've read the book, The Tipping Point. Yeah? You've heard of it? Yeah. You have heard of it. Good. So the broken window theory he sort of postulated was used by William Bratton, who was then the chief of the New York Transit Police Service. And in the 1980s, late 80s and early 90s, New York subway was considered, as compared to Dante's hell, because after night you just could not go into the subway. It was completely surrounded by drunks, there were vagrants, there was graffiti all over, to the extent that, soft muggers, as they are called, they would stand on the gate and demand money from people and let them through the gate. So you didn't have to buy a ticket. You sort of paid these guys the hafta or the money, extortion money, and they would let you into the gate. That was the way the entire subway was being run. So if you're a sane person in the 90s, you wouldn't go into the New York subway after about 6, 7 in the evening. Until William Bratton came over and he took over and he started the broken window concept. So the broken window concept essentially distills down to that if there is a house in a street which has a couple of broken windows, then pretty soon kids will come and they'll break a few more windows. Then they'll stay broken, then a few more windows will be broken, then someone would break the lights, then one day someone will break open the door, and then they'll start using that place to start drinking, doping, gambling, and all sorts of illegal activities. And before you know, that house will become the center point of crime for that street. And soon that street will turn into a criminal street. It'll be a place where stolen goods are bought and sold. It'll be a place where drugs are sold. It'll become a pickup point for prostitution. It'll turn that entire neighborhood into a crime neighborhood. But where did it all start? It started with somebody not demonstrating that I'm in charge. If the window is broken, I'll fix it immediately. And that's what Bratton did. He actually waged war on the entire criminal system by deciding that no train will be allowed to ply with graffiti. So the train would be brought into the sheds, it would be cleaned, it would be painted, it would be put back, and people thought he was crazy. Actually, he had many critics who said this is like, sort of cleaning the deck of the Titanic when it's going to hit the iceberg, because they were not making money. New York subway was losing money hand over fist, trains were not running on time, safety records were abysmally poor, but Bratton focused on only one thing, and that was that the trains had to be clean. He just did not allow any dirty train to get out into service. Pretty soon he extended that. What he started doing was he started checking people for ticketless travel. And whenever he'd find people who are not traveling on tickets, that allowed him legally to have their police records checked. So pretty soon, armed muggers started buying tickets, because if they didn't buy a ticket and they were arrested, they would be taken to the courts where they would be searched, and now they would be slammed down with another charge, which is possession of a weapon. So over a period of time, from the broken window to getting them to buy tickets, to getting them to not carry arms in the trains, to getting them to start becoming a law-abiding citizen, was a journey which began with that one single broken window. And that's pretty much how, and this was, of course, Bratton went on to become the police chief of New York City when Giuliani was the mayor. Giuliani actually took him as the mayor, and anecdotally, he was actually offered the Met Police job of London, and that was turned down because he was not a US citizen, so he went on to become an advisor for the Met Police. The point I'm trying to make is that pretty much every crime can be narrowed down to a unique set of circumstances from where it begins. And if we are able to start identifying that unique set of circumstances and addressing it at that point, we have a better chance of stopping it before it escalates into a much, much larger issue. Unfortunately, that one rape doesn't count. That one abduction doesn't count. That one hit and run doesn't count. That one red light jumping doesn't count. So all of these small issues start piling up and become that one huge unsurmountable problem. And by the time it's become that problem, we are looking at billions of dollars of expenditure to try and fix it. Whereas it could have been fixed at a broken window stage much earlier with much lower cost, much less social trauma, much less social pain. So what it needs, to my mind, is sort of a strategic thinking, which is not tactically local, that this has happened, so let's secure the mall. If it's a raid in a hospital, let's secure the hospital. It has to be looked at a much more holistic view. Very often there's this sentence that people say that we should have zero tolerance to terrorism. I'm sure you must have heard that. How can you have zero tolerance to terrorism in a nation that is tolerant of every other crime? People make comparisons with Israel, saying that in Israel, if something happens, the response is like that. But in Israel, if you jump a traffic light, they shoot you. That also happens. So whenever we are trying to address crime, we have to understand that it's got a symbiotic relationship throughout the system. If people are accepting bribes to pass containers, then the containers which carry pirated DVDs, the containers which carry pirated Louis Vuitton bags, we all know where the pirated stuff is sold, right? In Delhi, where is it sold? Ghaffar Market. Everywhere. Nehru Place. So tell me something, if this container is coming from Malaysia and it's got pirated DVDs in it, it's got Louis Vuitton bags in it, what's to stop an RDX, few kgs of RDX to come in it? How does a law enforcement agency say that I'll allow the Louis Vuitton to go, but RDX ko yahan rakh do? How will that happen? And who do you think starts the whole story? Why is this pirated DVD brought to Palika Bazaar? Because somebody buys it. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that we cannot have zero tolerance to one category of crime and be tolerant of every other category. Which is why I come back to that rape of that woman. Because if we are tolerant of that one category of crime, pretty soon you will have another incident where a mob burns up a person. Did that happen recently? Yeah, in Gurgaon somewhere? Is that the last incident? It won't happen again? Somebody wants to take a guarantee that there is a one-off, it will never happen again. It will happen again, okay. Number of times again. But where does it start? That sentence is a pretty powerful one. Why do you think things are only going to get worse? I'll tell you a very simple formula why it's going to get worse. This is This is not my formula, this is the formula of eternal evolution. That when you have less resources and more contenders, then you will have conflict. There's no debate on that. Because as resources reduce and contenders increase, you will have conflict. And when I say conflict, it means any sort of conflict, right? Now the problem really is that as we are seeing over the last few years, last few decades, the intensity of conflict is very violent. Do you remember this guy, I'm forgetting his name, who burnt himself during the Mandal Commission riots? Rajiv Goswami, everyone seems to remember his name. When was it? Which year? How many decades ago? A person burnt himself up and the government shook. That time. Today, burning themselves, killing a few people. You look at the kind of violence that happens in the movies. Look at the kind of shows that come on TV. Look at the video games. Violence is now part of our society. So every conflict, if I'm a person who's trying to express dissent, I know that unless I make it violent, people will not even pay attention. The media will not even give it, 2 seconds of news bite if it is not violent. So it has to be violent. So in other words, if we have more contenders, less resources, then all of these conflicts which are going to happen. We have around 26 to 30% of our population involved in agriculture at the moment. Most modern economies have less than 5%. As our agrarian economy starts modernizing, where do you think the remaining 25% have to go? Where will they go? Where will they go? They will come to the cities. And what will they come into the cities with? What do they know? What are they going to do in the cities? How are they going to survive in the cities? You have that conflict. You have conflict of simply living space. You have conflict of water. There are more people who have been displaced because of the pollution of water in the last 20 years than have been displaced in all the wars put together. And that's an amazing statistic. That entire water bodies are getting polluted, which is forcing migrations of people. Entire coastal belts are becoming dry because there is no fishing to be had. There are entire livelihoods which are getting destroyed. So what is the expectation? What are these people going to do? I mean, are they going to just lay down and die? And why should they? So pretty much every conflict that we will see now and in the future will indicate, and it's indicated, we are already, we are on wafer thin margins. I mean, there is, those of you who were in Bombay during 26/11 know that if at that point of time, a serious major fire would have broken out, regular fire, in any place, BKC, wherever, there would have been no fire tenders or no medical, nothing would have been there. The building would have been razed to the ground because there weren't that many fire tenders to deal with any sort of a crisis. And I think now we are heading towards a situation where there is a perfect storm. There are weather conditions which are changing. There are economic realities which are changing. There are people who are going to lose livelihood. They are being forced into the city. The living conditions are very poor. So unless we sort of start connecting these dots first and saying that every crime, every situation, every social hardship has a symbiotic relationship from which we cannot escape. I mean, I'm sure many of us live in communities where the response is to increase the height of the wall or to add one more gate or to add one more thing that looks under a car. But that's not going to solve the problem. That's just delaying the problem for a little while. It's not going to solve the problem. And my sense is that response to conflicts, response to violence cannot be just force. It just cannot be raising of more units. It cannot be raising of more CCTV. It cannot be putting more cameras, I'm sorry for all those who are selling this kind of stuff, but it cannot be just that. It has to be a far more holistic solution. It has to be more social solutions. There have to be more employment generation mechanisms. There have to be more equity structures that bring in equity, which allow people to be satisfied with or get a sense of satisfaction with what they have rather than a sense of angst. And there is a sense of angst. Mr. Pillai talked about the young India. It is also a very angry India. Right now, when we speak to, at least personally when I speak to young people in various parts, there is a lot of anger. There's a lot of angst. There is a lot of aspiration which has been fed into their heads with 24/7 TV. There's a lot of aspiration that has been shown to them which is completely out of their reach. And that's a surefire, cocktail for dissent. And if it is dissent which is accompanied with violence, then we are looking at a powder keg unless we start taking steps which are far more strategic in nature. Because eventually, whether we like it or not, we all pay the bill for security. This money doesn't come out from any security fund. It comes out from the economy. And each time we pay for an incident that has happened, it further debilitates our ability to grow. Because each rupee that is spent in security is a rupee that is not spent in development. So, which is why I think we have to look at, and this is a great forum because this brings in people from all different segments and different sort of categories of life, which allows us to take a look at those key pivot points, which if we leverage, if we press, our return of investment. Now, it could be education, it could be creating economic viable activities in the hinterland, it could be doing so many other things which do not look as if they are doing something with security. And Brighton could have done that too. He could have increased the number of policemen in the New York Transit Police. He could have made stricter laws for people who were carrying out atrocities in the railway stations or in the subway. But he chose that one pivot point from where he started this battle. And in a matter of about 5 to 6 years, he was able to make New York, and actually not just New York subway, the New York City owes its low crime rates to that one broken window from where he started. And I think that should be our effort, to start looking at the key pivot points which will change the game rather than just doing more of the same, because more of the same is not going to solve the problem. More malls, more security, more men in... as it is, I'm given to understand that after manufacturing, the largest employer is private security. And that's fascinating because even if we said that it is less by 50%, 50% of India's young people are being put into a profession which is fundamentally non-productive. So with that, I'd kind of end this. If there are any questions, I don't know, we take them in the end or... Yeah? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, do it after? Why don't we go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Police patrol and other thing, that will not make the difference. My question is, where is the fear? Unless there is a fear of law and order, punitive action, that too swift punitive action, thing won't change. If you rape somebody, and if decision after 20 years or 18 years, what effect it has got? Nothing. Then prior actionable information, which I am sure your national grid, I do not know. If I remember you are brigadier, then I am mixing you with somebody else. Your national grid was to upgrade it, to bring all the information regarding each and every transaction, movement and all that. I do not know where it is.
Is that a question or a statement?
No. First, this thing. My question is only on fear. And national grid is a prior information. And Mr. William, which you have mentioned about the broken window, every professional has to exert himself. Nobody will give him free hand. And lastly, the vote bank. I do not know whether our political leadership is clear about it, what is allowed to be done or not done. The professional has to keep the foot down. I will not do it. I will not obey this order. Unless that is done, I think we are just having a talk or discussion.
Yeah, I think that's
Thank you.
Can I have the back? I think very valid. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't get your name.
I'm G.D. Sharma.
Mr. Sharma. So thanks a ton. I mean, there were 3 statements and 1 question. So the fact is, I mean, we can stand here and talk about what is not happening till the cows come home, and nothing will change. There will be a 2-day conference. The things that didn't happen, we can keep debating it. To this year, next year, 2013, exactly, mostly the same conversations will happen. So I think we have to sort of use an opportunity like this one to say, should we stop the ranting and start doing something which is different from what we did earlier? You made a specific mention about the national grid. I'm afraid I can't speak about that right now. But other than that, the statements that you made, where is the fear? So where does the fear come from? The fear, my sense is, needs to come from an unacceptability of allowing the perpetrator or the perpetrators to continue to live peacefully up to the time it is not brought to justice. And for that, the whole society is responsible. So that's why I'm saying the whole society needs to actually own the responsibility for that, collective responsibility for that. And I think until that happens, we will...
But at the same time, state cannot wash with the hand.
Nobody's... I mean, sorry. I mean, so
Okay,
you have a valid point there. Any other question?
I think we'll take the rest of the questions.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you again.
Thank you.